Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. The Pakistan Army says a soldier has been martyred and 3 others wounded in exchange of fire with terrorists in Balochistan. The military's media wing said the shootout took place when the terrorists opened fire on a patrolling convoy in the city of Turbat. In the last 5 days, 22 troops have been martyred in terror attacks in the provinces of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. Pakistan has repeatedly pointed to India's involvement in terrorist activities. Turkey and Azerbaijan have accused Armenia of committing war crimes in fighting over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. This comes after 13 people were killed and more than 40 wounded in the Armenian shelling on the city of Ganja. The two countries vowed to hold Armenia accountable for its actions. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party has won a landslide victory in New Zealand's general election. The Electoral Commission says the Labour Party has won 49% of the vote ahead of the National Party's 27%. Ardern is projected to win a rare outright parliamentary majority. India has recorded 837 COVID-19 deaths and over 62,000 infections overnight as the country's caseload approaches 7.5 million. Brazil has registered 754 deaths since yesterday, with the toll crossing 153,000. In Pakistan, 13 people died from the virus overnight, taking the death count to 6,638. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed over 1.1 million lives and infected over 39 million people so far. And in the English Premier League, Everton came from behind twice to draw 2-2 with Liverpool to maintain their unbeaten start. Sadio Mane and Mo Salah scored for Liverpool in either half of the game. Everton fought back with goals from Michael Keane and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Those were the headlines and detailed stories. Right after a short break, stay tuned. Indian troops have martyred another civilian in occupied Jammu and Kashmir's Islamabad district. The occupying troops targeted the youth during a cordon and search operation in Ladno area of the district. The military crackdown in the area is still underway. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Office strongly condemned India's aggression against civilians in the occupied valley. In a press briefing, spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said the Indian forces have martyred more than 300 Kashmiris in a year. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 439 days. India's major political party, Congress, has called for the restoration of occupied Jammu and Kashmir's special status. In a tweet, former Home Minister P. Chidambaram said the arbitrary and unconstitutional decisions of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government must be rescinded. Details in this report.
The occupied valley's plight started on 26th of October 1947, when India claimed to have signed Instrument of Accession on that day with the Maharaja of Kashmir. Professor Christopher Snedden writes, large parts of the valley had declared independence from Hari Singh's oppressive rule. Snedden says Singh had no legal capacity under international law to sign the document, as he had lost effective control of the state in the presence of an outstanding standstill agreement between Pakistan and Singh. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office and US State Department also affirmed the instrument could not come into effect. The United Nations does not consider Indian claims as valid and recognizes Kashmir as a disputed territory. United Nations Security Council resolutions categorically denounce the permanent accession of the valley via the instrument. It conditions the future political status of the valley on the outcome of free, fair and impartial plebiscite. Last year, on 5th August, New Delhi revoked Article 370. The article allowed the state of Muslim majority a certain amount of autonomy, its own constitution, separate flag and freedom to make laws. According to the Indian Constitution, Article 370 could only be modified with the agreement of the state government. The Modi government's illegal decision aggravated the situation in the occupied territory ever since Jammu and Kashmir has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout.
For more on this, we are joined by legal expert on Kashmir, Faisal Naqvi. Thank you for your time at Indus News. First of all, India's main opposition party, Congress, has asked Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government to restore Article 370 and give Kashmiris their rights. How do you think will New Delhi respond to this demand?
I don't think that New Delhi is going to take this. I don't think it's going to respond positively. They've force this down the throat of the Kashmiris, and the fact that their domestic opposition is now calling for them very sensibly to step back is one thing, but I don't think Modi's government is in any mood to listen to anybody's sense. They have taken a path, they have pushed ahead, full steam ahead, notwithstanding the opposition and the condemnation of the world, and notwithstanding the opposition and the protests of the Kashmiri people.
So, Mr. Naqvi, what are the options left for the international community to stop the ongoing Indian atrocities in occupied Kashmir?
I think it's important for the international community to stay engaged in this issue and not to just simply put it on a back burner. For some time, there was, notwithstanding Pakistan's efforts, the international community thought that Kashmir was essentially over. But what has happened over the last few years, particularly since 2016, is that because of the efforts and the sacrifices of the Kashmiri people, they have shown that they refuse to accept the fascist dispensation of the Modi regime. And those sacrifices of the Kashmiri people need to be recognized and highlighted. For example, the way in which the Indian forces use shotguns to control Kashmiri protesters, that's a complete and blatant violation of international law. That's something that the international community needs to take notice of and to condemn it in the harshest form, in the harshest way possible.
So, Mr. Naqvi, India is also engaged in a military standoff with China, and China has repeatedly refused to recognize Ladakh as India's union territory. How do you think will this impact the overall issue?
Well, I think when India originally got annexed Kashmir, they thought that they were simply going to be presenting the world with a fait accompli, and I don't think they'd really taken into account Chinese sentiment on this. They completely underestimated the depth of opposition to this move from the Kashmiri people, from Pakistan and from China. So I think they've been forced to reconsider their options by what has happened in Ladakh and in Kashmir.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal Naqvi, for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. Now, moving on, Pakistan has rejected Indian Foreign Ministry's remarks, blaming Islamabad for tense bilateral ties. The Foreign Office said India must put its own house in order before leveling baseless allegations against Pakistan. It said India is creating problems with nearly all of its neighboring countries. The Foreign Office said India has been continuing grave human rights violations in occupied Kashmir for the last many decades. It said portraying innocent Kashmiri civilians as terrorists show the moral bankruptcy of the Indian leadership. It said a perpetrator of state terrorism cannot masquerade as a victim of terrorism. Turkey and Azerbaijan have accused Armenia of committing war crimes in fighting over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. This comes after 13 people were killed and more than 40 wounded in the Armenian shelling on the city of Ganja. The two countries have vowed to hold Armenia accountable for its atrocities. Earlier, Azerbaijan said it had liberated Fuzuli city in Karabakh region from the Armenian occupation. Nearly 600 people have been killed in the conflict since it broke out on the 27th of September. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Office reiterated its support for Azerbaijan and urged Armenia to stop its irresponsible propaganda. It was referring to Armenian authorities' claim that Pakistani troops have been fighting alongside Azerbaijani troops. The European Union has imposed targeted restrictive measures on 7 recently appointed ministers in Syria. In a statement, the European Council said the curbs were imposed over violent repression against Syria's civil population. It said the sanctions will include a travel ban on ministers and freeze their assets as well. The statement said with the recent move, 280 people have become subjected to EU sanctions. It said EU remains committed to find a lasting political solution to the Syrian conflict under international law. The Council keeps developments in the Syrian conflict under constant review. Any decision to prolong the sanctions is for the Council to take on an annual basis. A U.S. delegation led by Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will travel to Israel, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. The visit comes in support of the recently signed normalization deals between Israel and 2 other Arab countries. In a statement, the Treasury Department said the 3-day visit is aimed at supporting expanded economic cooperation. It added the delegation will join Israeli officials on the first ever direct commercial flight from Israel to Bahrain. The statement read the group will then fly to Abu Dhabi, where the first ever Abraham Accords Business Summit will be held. The Treasury Department said the US and Israeli delegation will then fly back to Tel Aviv. Yemen's warring parties have exchanged hundreds more prisoners under a deal struck in Switzerland last month. Planes took off from Yemeni airports on the second and the final day of an operation to fly about 1,000 men home. Welcoming the release, the International Committee of the Red Cross said over 1,000 prisoners were returned home. It said 352 prisoners were exchanged today after more than 700 were swapped yesterday. The warring sides had agreed in 2018 to swap 15,000 detainees split between both the sides to pave the way for the political negotiations. Yemen has been at war since the Houthis ousted the government from power in Sana'a in late 2014. The US says there are reports that Turkey has fired a missile to test its Russian-made S-400 defense system. The State Department says there will be potentially serious consequences if Turkey activated its S-400 system. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus said Washington condemns Ankar's missile test launch. She said it is incompatible with Ankar's responsibilities as a NATO ally and a strategic partners of the US. The Pentagon says the S-400 should not be activated. A Pentagon spokesperson said Turkey has already been suspended from the F-35 program. He said the S-400 continues to be a barrier to progress elsewhere in the bilateral relationship. Turkey's defense ministry says it will neither deny nor confirm the missile tests. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party has won a landslide victory in New Zealand's general election. Electoral Commission results show Labour Party have secured 49% of the vote, while the opposition National Party got 27% of the ballots. It says the Labour Party is on track to win 64 of the 120 seats in the country's unicameral parliament. It will be the highest seats won by any party since New Zealand adopted a proportional voting system in 1996. Ardern came out of her home in Auckland to celebrate her victory with her supporters. Opposition National Party leader Judith Collins congratulated Ardern on an outstanding result. New Zealanders have also voted on referendums to legalize euthanasia and recreational marijuana. The result of the referendum will be announced on the 30th of October. More stories to follow, but right after a short break, stay tuned. Welcome back. US President Donald Trump and his Democratic rival Joe Biden campaign in key battlegrounds amid early voting surge. The two candidates are focused on closely fought states expected to determine the winner of November 3 presidential election. Details in this report.
More than 22 million Americans have voted so far, either in person or by mail, according to the U.S. Election Project. Trump, who lags in opinion polls, is also behind Biden in fundraising. Addressing a crowd of seniors in Florida, the president expressed empathy for those who lost family members to COVID-19. Recently recovered from the disease himself, Trump said he felt their anguish.
My heart breaks for every grieving family that has lost a precious loved one. I feel their anguish and I mourn their loss. I feel their pain. I know that the terrible pain that they have gone through, and you lose someone and there's nothing to describe.
Just weeks ahead of the election, the vote has centered not only to the president's handling of the pandemic, but on the healthcare as well. Joe Biden has shown strength with senior voters who blame Trump for the increase in COVID-19 cases. He has lambasted the president for downplaying the severity of the crisis and seeking to dismantle Affordable Care Act. Speaking at an event in Michigan, Biden vowed to build on the act if he became the president.
If I have the honor of becoming your president, we'll build on the Affordable Care Act, no matter what they do. You can choose to keep a private plan if you still have one, because some of the private plans negotiated with the UFW and others are good plans. But we'll also offer you a Medicare-like public health insurance option. It'll force private insurers to keep premiums low and offer better coverage because it's for the first time they'll have to compete for your business against a public insurer that doesn't have the profit motive in mind.
Reports indicate registered Democrats have so far outvoted registered Republicans, casting more than double the number of ballots. Of this early voting Democrats, women and Black Americans are in particularly high number.
U.S. President has approved a major disaster declaration for California linked to September wildfires. Donald Trump reversed a decision earlier made by Federal Emergency Management Agency. In a statement, the White House said Trump has ordered federal assistance to supplement recovery efforts. In a tweet, California's governor expressed his gratitude for the president's quick response. Earlier, Governor Gavin Newsom had sent a letter to the White House asking for the declaration. FEMA Administrator Pete Gaynor has said the damage was not of such severity to be beyond the state's capabilities. California has seen about 4.1 million acres of land burned this year, causing $229 million of damage. Despite police crackdown, hundreds of Thais rally across Bangkok, defying a government ban on gatherings. For the last 3 months, protesters have been calling for the resignation of Prime Minister and a reduction in the king's powers. In a statement, the People's Movement vowed to continue the protests. Condemning police violence, the movement urged people to be ready for what it called suppression tactics. Earlier, violent scuffles broke out between Thai police and anti-government protesters. The police have arrested more than 50 people, including protest leaders, in the past week. In a news conference, a police spokesperson said, violent or not, all the gatherings are illegal. Meanwhile, a government spokesperson says there is no win or lose for any side, as it all brings damage to the country. Lebanon's largest Christian political party says it will not back the nomination of former Premier Saad al-Hariri to lead the government. In a statement, the Free Patriotic Movement said it could not support a political figure like Hariri. It said French President Emmanuel Macron had called for a reformist government based on technocrats. Hariri quit the government last October amid mounting nationwide protests over the economic crisis. The former premier said he is ready to lead the government to implement reforms proposed by France. But he failed to muster support from two main Christian parties, the FPM and Lebanese forces. The country's financial woes have multiplied following the massive Beirut blast in August. India has recorded 837 COVID-19 deaths and over 62,000 infections overnight as the country's caseload topped 7.4 million. Brazil has registered 754 deaths since yesterday, with the toll crossing 153,000. Globally, coronavirus has claimed over 1.1 million lives and infected over 39 million people so far. More in this report.
The second wave of COVID-19 continues to exert pressure on Europe. Germany, Greece and Slovenia set new records of infections just a day after Italy, Portugal and Lithuania hit their single-day highs. The governments continue to impose stricter restrictions across the continent to contain the virus. In Belgium, hospitals risk running out of beds as infections soar and the country imposes new curbs.
Restaurants and cafes will have to close for a period of 1 month. There will be an evaluation in 2 weeks, and there will also be a large-scale support package to help cafes and restaurants to help them through this clearly very difficult time. The sale of alcohol will be prohibited after 8 p.m. There will be a curfew between midnight and 5 a.m.
Only 5 countries, including Brazil, Argentina and Mexico, account for 80% of the Latin America's COVID-19 infections. The pandemic has not only devastated the region's economies, but also put a huge strain on its social and cultural lives. Mexico's indigenous people face uncertainties as COVID-19 stems the annual tradition of visiting cemeteries on the Day of Dead.
Right now, we planted 50% of what we plant every year because we have suffered because of the plants that we've been left with that we had to throw out. There have been many losses this year.
The situation in India remains grim as the country continues to witness world's highest number of daily deaths. Meanwhile, the Chinese mainland reported 13 new imported cases in the past 24 hours.
In Pakistan, 13 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 during the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the countrywide death toll has risen to 6,638. The ministry says 641 people tested positive overnight. It said there are 9,174 active COVID-19 cases in the country. The ministry added out of nearly 322,000 cases, over 306,000 have recovered so far. It said more than 141,000 cases have been detected in southern province of Sindh, while Punjab has reported some 101,000 cases. Chileans gathered in Santiago to record demonstration against inequality and President Piñera's government. Mass protests began on 18th of October last year and have so far left 31 people dead and around 30,000 detained. Violence broke out on the streets as angry protesters drew Molotov cocktails and rocks at the police. Police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse the demonstrators. Amnesty International has called on Chile to investigate its police force in connection with alleged human rights abuses. A new constitution was a central demand that emerged from months of protests. Chileans are expected to vote a new constitution in a referendum later this month. In Cambodia, the death toll from prolonged heavy rains and flash flooding has reached 24. Authorities said tens of thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes. Authorities said almost 60,000 houses got flooded. They said 240,000 hectares of farmland has submerged under rainwater, affecting over 245,000 people. The torrential rains in Cambodia have ravaged 19 provinces and cities, including the capital, Phnom Penh. Over the weekend, more rain is forecast across most parts of the country. Pakistan's southwestern province of Balochistan has been a victim of foreign militancy for years, but now normalcy has returned to the region thanks to the unflagging efforts by security forces. The improved security situation is leading to robust economic activities in the area. More in this report by our correspondent Sumaira Khan from Turbat, Balochistan.
Balochistan shares a permeable border with Iran and Afghanistan. For decades, cross-border infiltration hindered the development in the province. The security situation has now improved significantly after the Pakistan Army began fencing the country's border with Afghanistan and Iran.
There's a lot of problems, especially in land orders, and the border intervention is also present. And if you see, if you compare 2013 to today, there's a lot of differences between the land orders. Land orders are quite improved. The federal government have the duty to concentrate more on Balochistan because there's a deprivation from last 70 years.
The province is famous for producing more than 300 varieties of high-quality date palm. Farmers are now reaping benefits of the improved security situation.
Security situation is better in the province as compared to the past decades. We have road infrastructure, telecommunication networking, and political stability. Now is the time for foreigners to invest in Balochistan.
Various development projects under the multi-billion-dollar China-Pakistan Economic Corridor are underway in the province. An 870-kilometer-long motorway is being built to connect the port city of Gwadar to the southeastern province of Sindh. Some key projects that have been completed so far include the Mirani Dam and several educational institutes.
When it comes to Balochistan, the area is vast, so were the grievances. But the way those grievances were addressed through development projects and a better law and order security situation, the efforts have started showing their positive results. Reporting for Indus News, Sumaira Khan, Mirani Dam, Balochistan.
Child malnutrition remains a prevalent challenge in developing countries across the world, but Pakistan has allocated around $56 million to its Ehsaas Nasho-Numa program to tackle the issue in the country. More in this report by our correspondent Manahil Ahmed from Islamabad.
Pakistan treads forward as it takes extensive measures and initiatives in prioritizing health and social care. UNICEF Nutrient Officer Dr. Sabah Shuja says the UNICEF mandate is supporting the government in providing a well-nourished community.
UNICEF is there to support government of Pakistan at the federal level, at the provincial level, and at the regional level. So since UNICEF mandate is with the children, so obviously we are working toward the improvement of malnutrition, status, and to provide a well-nourished, population to this country.
Special Assistant to Prime Minister on Poverty Alleviation and Social Safety, Dr. Sania Nishtar said the government has set a direction on how to interplay.
One decision the federal government took was that it will coordinate high-level policy to make sure that there's no fragmentation, there are no duplications, that the appropriate synergies are being exploited, there are no missing areas. To push the needle further on that, we created the National Nutrition Council. So that's the highest coordinating body on nutrition within the country.
With the Ehsaas Nasho-Numa program, Dr. Nishtar is hopeful that the government will be able to reduce stunting by 8%.
It's been rolled out in 9 districts of the country. And in those 9 districts, we've set up 35 centers. The program is budgeted in such a way that we plan to reach out to 250,000 families. And the idea is that the outcome of interest is that the prevalence of stunting should be reduced by around 8%.
To create awareness in rural areas, special charts, posters, and informative videos on food and hygiene have been compiled. These will not only help educate the woman, but will go a long way in eradicating malnutrition. Reporting for Indus News, Manahil Ahmed, Islamabad.
Greece's legendary Mount Olympus is a mighty mountain for some, but for others it is just a tiny hurdle. Olympus is notable in Greek mythology as the home of the ancient god Zeus. Around 10,000 people climb it every year, and a 22-year-old biology student with disabilities is the latest to do so. This report has the details.
Eleftheria Tosho has been tied to a wheelchair throughout her life. That hasn't stopped her from conquering the peak of Mount Olympus. To reach her lofty goal, she needed the help of 28-year-old Marius Jenica. She was strapped onto Jenica's back in a modified backpack, and it took them 3 hours to reach the peak.
My goal was not to send some message or prove something. I just wanted to live the experience and have fun. Now, if we succeeded in sending a message and help people with disabilities by doing this, I will be happy, and it will make what we experienced even more beautiful.
Jenica is an endurance runner who has climbed the mountain several times, whom Tosho met through mutual friends. He says a team of physiotherapists and mountain climbers was there to support them. A clearly moved Jenica was quick to admit that he has never experienced anything more beautiful than this.
I wouldn't call it difficult. I have never done something more beautiful. I think it has completed me as a person. I don't dwell on the difficulty, but on how beautiful the whole team felt.
Tosho says she just can't find the words to express what she felt when she reached the peak of Olympus. She says she will do it again, as well as other extreme sports. Though Tosho says her goal was not to send a message, but she has undoubtedly become an inspiration for people with disabilities everywhere.
In China, Shanghai's Spring and Summer 2021 Fashion Week is presenting the city's fashionistas. The fashion show highlights Chinese original elements in the new designs debuted this season.
One of the designers featured classic Chinese mythical figure Fu, known for his fearless efforts to catch the sun. Another renowned clothing firm, Hemu's new designs were also inspired by one of the oldest Chinese classics of mountains and rivers. In recent years, Chinese consumers have preferred domestically produced and original designs.
Chinese consumers used to prefer some Western brands to domestic ones, but in recent years this trend has been reversed. With more and more excellent original Chinese designers emerging, Chinese consumers are more and more likely to foot the bill for some domestic vanguard designers. Although the current market mainly features designers of the first and second tier cities, the designers of the second and third tier cities are coming strong, and that is where we will focus our efforts to develop.
The Chinese clothing industry also expects to draw international customers by showing off indigenous designs at the gala. The fashion show will also organize nearly 100 online shows.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. The World Bank says it must push ahead with efforts to deliver $160 billion in coronavirus aid by June 2021. In a communique, a joint development committee said the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund must provide debt relief to the developing countries. The committee urged IMF to deploy all the available tools and resources to help member states from the crisis. It said IMF provided $100 billion in assistance to over 80 countries during the pandemic so far. Earlier, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin warned the World Bank to manage its financial resources transparently. He said banks should prioritize funds for poor countries with the greatest needs. China says it has reached a consensus with the Philippines on energy projects in the South China Sea. In a statement, a foreign ministry spokesperson, Zhao Lijian, said the two countries will build a consortium mechanism. He said China hopes the two sides can promote a positive progress in the joint development of energy. Earlier, Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte lifted a moratorium on South China Sea exploration projects. The moratorium was imposed in 2014 due to a territorial dispute with Beijing, which Manila won in 2016. In football, Everton have come from behind twice to draw 2-2 with Liverpool to maintain their unbeaten start to the Premier League. Sadio Mane put Liverpool ahead in the third minute. Everton equalised swiftly at Goodison Park when Michael Keane scored from a header. Liverpool were back in front with 18 minutes left when Mohamed Salah scored for visitors. Dominic Calvert-Lewin's towering header equalled the score with only 9 minutes left. Everton were then reduced to 10 men when Richarlison was sent off for a wild challenge on Thiago. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.